Olá a todos, eu sou Laura Seabra do time de Third Party Distribution da BTG Pactual Asset. Nosso time tem um papel muito importante na escolha e avaliação de gestoras internacionais, oferecendo uma plataforma cheia de opções de fundos globais para os nossos clientes. Hoje começa uma série de 3 episódios com alguns dos gestores que representamos e que participaram da 7ª edição da nossa Global Managers Conference. E para abrir a série, é com prazer que vamos ter uma conversa rica e esclarecedora com Sean Carroll, Client Portfolio Manager da gestora inglesa Janus Henderson. A Janus Henderson é uma parceira de longa data e um dos fundos que distribuímos aqui no Brasil é o Biotech Fund, que, aliás, é um fundo de destaque no setor de biotecnologia, fortemente ligado à inovação e disrupção. Com mais de 90 anos de história e cerca de 400 bilhões de dólares sob gestão, a Janus Henderson atua em diversas classes de ativos, incluindo renda variável, renda fixa, multiativos e estratégias alternativas, além de oferecer soluções personalizadas e temáticas para os seus clientes ao redor do mundo. Sean, muito obrigada por estar aqui conosco. Switch to English now. Why should Brazilian investors consider the biotech sector?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be back in Brazil. I think there's a few reasons why Brazilian investors should consider the biotech sector. I think one is it offers significant growth potential. It's a sector where through active management you can deliver, double-digit returns. It's typical for good managers to deliver returns within the range of 20 to 25%. We do think it is a sector where you do want to be active. So one of the best ways we think to generate returns long-term in biotech is by investing in individual companies versus going passive. But I think the main reason too is that you're not getting exposure to biotech in the broad market indices. So if you're investing, for example, in the MSCI World Index, you're not getting sufficient exposure, we think, to biotech companies. I think most importantly, you're not getting exposure to the most innovative area of biotech, which is really the smaller, earlier stage biotech companies.
And what do you believe there are the main features that make healthcare and biotech sector strategic from a long-term investment perspective?
Yeah, I think the first thing to consider with healthcare and biotech is that it does benefit from a combination of long-term tailwinds that include accelerating innovation, aging populations, the rising global middle class. So I think the sector uniquely benefits from some of these long-term trends. I think the other thing too is that focusing on the biotech sector, it's really never been more efficient than it is today. We've seen a 150% increase in new drugs coming to market over the last 2 decades, 132 in the last 2 years. So the sector has never been more efficient, and given some of the pullback we've seen really, year to date or since the US election, the sector is trading at its deepest discount that we've seen in decades. There's more than 20% of biotech companies today that are trading below cash. So we think, for long-term investors, it's a really attractive entry point into an innovative sector. So, if investors are looking for innovation on sale opportunities, we think biotech is a really attractive sector to be investing in.
So healthcare is often viewed as a defensive sector. How does this defensiveness translate across different market cycles?
Yeah, so the healthcare sector has historically been defensive, and I think this is because even in economic slowdowns, most individuals tend to prioritize their health and well-being over other goods and services. So for that reason, healthcare tends to be less cyclical. If we think back to the last major pullback for U.S. and global equities, 2022, when both U.S. and global equities are down 18%, the healthcare sector was only down 5%, so it certainly was defensive in that environment. And if we think about the last 5 significant drawdowns for global equities of 15% or more, healthcare has only averaged roughly half the downside capture. So it is a sector that can be defensive in those market pullbacks, but I think what's unique about it is that you do get the defensiveness, which normally comes from large cap pharma companies, healthcare services companies, but you get those defensive characteristics with the unique growth potential from biotech companies. So I think that's the main reason that healthcare has been defensive, is that most of us just prioritize our health and well-being, in those recessionary environments.
And what are the major structural trends you believe will shape the future of healthcare and biotech in the coming years?
Yeah, I think the biggest one today is one that everyone's been talking about. It's probably AI, and we think that, versus any other sector of the market, any other industry, healthcare probably stands to benefit the most from the adoption of artificial intelligence or AI, and I think it's really across a number of different areas. First and foremost, in terms of drug development, typically it takes about 7 to 10 years to bring a new drug to market. We think with the benefit of AI, we could shorten that to potentially 5 to 7 years. But there's benefits too with AI in terms of imaging and diagnostics, more accurate reading of cancer scans, for example. AI-assisted robotic surgery is something that we're really excited about, helping to make average surgeons better than average, much more precise in the procedures. So, really across all these different areas of healthcare, the delivery of healthcare, biotech, there's just numerous applications for AI that we think are going to be really exciting going forward.
There are regulatory risks and drug approval cycles in this investment process. How to navigate through it?
Yeah. Political and regulatory shifts is always going to create volatility for the biotech sector. We're certainly seeing that today with the new Trump administration coming into office. But I think, the thing to keep in mind is that changes at the FDA, discussions around drug pricing, these are short-term headwinds. I think, thinking about the healthcare sector today, we feel pretty good about the FDA. We feel pretty good about where drug pricing is going to land. So I think, for us, it's staying focused on the long term, focus on the science and the fundamentals of the company that we own, know that some of these temporary political and regulatory shifts, they are temporary. But if you focus on the long term, what we typically see is that biotech companies that are having success delivering novel therapies in disease category where there is no available treatment today, these companies tend to go on to see strong returns, no matter what the regulatory environment looks like. So we think ultimately innovation wins out, and we think that will be the case again, so far this year.
In what ways does global demographic change influence decisions in the healthcare sector?
Yeah, I think it's a self-fulfilling cycle. It's a good one for healthcare in terms of if you think about people living longer, benefiting from the innovation of healthcare. But as people live longer past the age of 65, they tend to spend 3 times more on medicine. So as people are living longer, benefiting, for example, from advances in obesity, the GLP-1 medicines, or advances in cancer treatment, as people live longer, they'll spend more on medicine. So that's an important trend to think about. I think the other is the rising global middle class, and as that other areas of the world develop and as their populations move into the middle class, they'll tend to spend a lot more on healthcare. So right now, healthcare represents roughly 10% of global GDP. We think that number will increase substantially over the next couple of years. Healthcare in the US is roughly 18 to 20% of GDP, so you can imagine there's significant opportunity for healthcare spending to grow globally as people live longer and as these other populations develop and move into the middle class.
And where do you see the greatest potential for active management to add value in such complex and specialized sectors?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, and we would say that by far, biotech offers the greatest opportunity to add value through active management. It is the least efficient sector of the market by far. Each year on average over the last 10 years, and this is no matter what's happening in markets, no matter what's happening in the macro environment, the top 5 biotech stocks return over 220% on average. The bottom 5 lose 80%. So from an active management perspective, our job is to more consistently identify those, top 5 stocks each year. These are the companies that are launching new medicines with large market opportunities, and those stocks, and we've even seen it so far year to date, those companies can go on to see very meaningful returns. So we think, long term, if you think too about the passive indices in biotech over the last, 5 or 10 years, they've been flat to negative. So back to one of my original points, I think the best way to generate long-term returns in biotech is through active management and really through stock selection, finding those handful of top performers each year.
Perfect. To end our conversation, would you like to share a final message?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'm excited to be here, excited to be talking about biotech. I think the key point for biotech, just to summarize, is that it's a sector that has never been more innovative, but also a sector that is trading at one of its deepest discounts. So I think for long-term investors, looking for growth potential, looking for kind of a unique return stream that's a little bit different than the broader market, a little bit different from perhaps your tech exposure, we see biotech as probably one of the most attractive sectors to invest in, and right now being a particularly attractive entry point.
Thank you very much for being here with us. Obrigada a todos que nos acompanharam. Para quem quiser conhecer mais sobre a Janus Henderson e sobre o Fundo de Biotecnologia que nós distribuímos aqui no Brasil, fiquem à vontade para nos contatar. Muito obrigada e até mais.